With me here in Davos is the Governor of the South African Reserve Bank, Lesetja Kganyago. Governor, thank you very much for your time. Always good to see you. Governor, you've just arrived at the World Economic Forum. It's the second day here, Davos, Switzerland. What are you expecting for Team South Africa?
Well, the South African economy had always had its own structural problems. COVID just made the situation worse. But we have recovered in terms of economic activity from COVID. And the message that we are carrying here in Davos is that the South African economy is actually, in spite of all these shocks that it has experienced, has demonstrated to be quite resilient. We have been rebuilding buffers, and I think that Team Treasury has done a very good job in arresting the debt trajectory, and that becomes part of the resilience of the South African economy. What will we be focusing during the course of the week? And of course, as central bankers now, is not just central bankers. We are also seeing governments. Governments are facing a public that is increasingly intolerant of inflation. And one of the sessions I will be attending has to do with the high cost of living. And so many young people in their 20s and their 30s, they do not know what to live with high inflation is like. And this is sort of like taking them by surprise. They had known low inflation, they had known low interest rates. And now that inflation has risen, initially in the developed world, and now it had spread into the emerging market economies, central banks have got to act. And the tools that central banks deploy are the interest rates, of course. And but what we are finding is that across countries, policymakers are confronted with this, that they are facing a public that is increasingly intolerable of high inflation.
Governor, we saw the 2023 Global Risks Report coming out from the World Economic Forum. The cost of living being the increased cost of living being the number one risk, and then climate adaptation mitigation being the longer term risk. The cost of living, increasing cost of living, is the short term risk that we're seeing. Well, how do you balance that from a South African perspective? Can we focus on those longer term risks when we've got such pressing issues from a cost of living perspective?
If you do not focus on the long term risks, you run a serious policy conundrum, and what you would be faced with is that you might think that you are doing things in the short term which might detract you from dealing with long-term risks, and those long-term risks would materialize. We have seen in South Africa that climate change effects are real. We had seen the floods, they had disrupted production, they disrupted supply and logistics chains. So these things are real, and we have got to deal with that. Well, you said short term. Well, that is actually the policy mistake that had been made in the main by my colleagues in the advanced economies. That when inflation reared its ugly head in 2021, they are all convincing themselves that it is actually temporary. Well, we have now seen that inflation has become more persistent, that we thought that it would decline very soon as the shocks dissipate. But what is complicating the world for central bankers at the moment is that you have got this multiplicity of shocks. And because there are a multiplicity of shocks, if you are faced with one shock, you will then see through the shock and deal with the second round effects. But if there are a multiplicity of shocks, price setters change their behavior. And what we have seen even in South Africa this week, that we saw that inflation expectations had actually crept up. And when inflation expectations crept up, it's very important that the central bank comes in and nip that in the bud, because you can no longer convince yourself and say that this is just supply side shocks. The real price formation process has changed, and the central bank has got to live true to its mandate.
Governor, you always make me proud to be South African. I've been chatting to South African Reserve Bank Governor Lesetja Kganyago here on the ground, Davos 23. This is a partnership between the Nielsen Network, BizNews, and Brand South Africa.